whether you know it or not, hand to heart, I don't typically like leading the pod with a negative, because my experience over the years is that fans would rather listen to folks celebrate something good than focus on something that maybe isn't going so well. So that acknowledged, we have to start with Kansas, because that's clearly the biggest story this morning. Final score, BYU 91, Kansas 57. It was a beatdown in Provo. So after being voted preseason number 1 in the AP poll for the second straight year, the Jayhawks are now 17-9 overall, 8-7 in the Big 12, and just 3-5 in their past 8 games. In Bill Self's first 20 years at Kansas, he never lost more than 6 Big 12 games in a season. Literally never. Then last season, he lost 8. Now this season, he already has 7. Strong job, first and foremost. Thank you for being here. Now, can you please explain what's going on with Bill Self and his Blue Blood program?
Yeah. Hey, good morning. And we could celebrate a positive here. That was some sort of beatdown by BYU last night. But yeah, I think the larger story is obviously Kansas and what is wrong with them. A 34-point loss, tied for the largest loss for Kansas under Bill Self at Kansas, 3rd worst in program history for Kansas. Things have just gone completely off the rails. And I thought Self was pretty candid after the game last night and talking just about, like, they've been inconsistent. They just have not been able to click for one reason or another. And he put it pretty simply, like, I thought we were awful. And if you watch the game, it's hard to, disagree with his assessment. They were very bad. He said the offense stunk. We couldn't stop them. And, basically we couldn't score on offense. We couldn't get out of our way on defense, and BYU just took advantage of whatever energy Kansas brought into Provo last night. So, Self kind of talked about, like, we need to regroup. We need to get away from each other. And, this Kansas team has just been inconsistent throughout the season. And it's a weird vibe where Kansas last season ended the year where they had some injuries, they had some attrition, they had some guys who, they didn't have the depth. And throughout that kind of stretch run, Self was talking about, like, I can't wait until next season. Well, now he's had this season and he had some time to kind of regroup that roster, and it just has not clicked. And it's a weird thing for, one of the best coaches in college basketball to have a roster that's just frankly not good enough. But for one reason or another, they're not clicking. And, you look at the guys that they brought in, they just have not been good enough this season.
I agree with you. Like, last season was disappointing. Obviously, Bill was frustrated down the stretch. He made that clear. But it was also, at least in my mind, something that wasn't too difficult to explain. Like, your best players got hurt, and then it just really went the wrong way. That's not what this is. I mean, I know they've dealt with some injury stuff, both preseason and midseason, but this team is not on the verge of dropping out of the AP poll. And frankly, it should have dropped out, at least in my opinion, on Monday. I had them out after this past weekend. I don't think there's any way you can be where they were on Monday, survive what happened last night, and or deal with what happened last night, and then remain in the AP poll Monday. So they're going to drop out. And when they drop out, it will not necessarily be, because of the same reasons they were struggling as last season progressed. This will just be because, as you put it, it has never clicked. And now it's not clicking for 2 straight years. And though I guess anybody can have a bad 2-year run, it's impossible not to make note of this, because we're talking about a guy and a program, a coach and a place that never had bad 2-year runs. Or are you ready for this? 1-year runs, like 2-week runs. Like, there's never been bad here. As I pointed out on Inside College Basketball late last night, in Bill Self's first 20 years at Kansas, he never lost more than 6 league games. Never once, not once. And again, he lost 8 last year. He's already lost 7 this year. Put another way, if you include Big 12 tournaments for the past 2+ years, Kansas is now 18-17. Past 35 games against Big 12 opponents. 18-17. This is from a program that used to run the entire league. So and basically without exception. So as I was talking to Norlander yesterday, sometimes I think it's helpful to remove your opinion from something when everybody has opinions about something. Just remove it and try to talk about it factually. Opinion out of it. We can get an opinion later, but let's start with facts, something nobody could disagree with. So here's a fact. We can talk about why or how or whatever, but it starts here. The worst 2 years Bill Self has ever had as a Kansas coach or a power conference coach, frankly, is last season and this season. They happen to come now. What does that mean? Should that be concerning for Kansas fans? A one-off, that can happen to anybody. Mike Krzyzewski, Roy Williams, it does not matter. But I do think it's at least something to pay attention to when the two worst seasons you have ever had at this school happen to come right now and the season that preceded it. And after you were so caught off guard by the season that preceded it last season, you like verbalized how much you were going to not allow that to happen again.
Right.
And it's happening again, and it's arguably worse.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I think people, if you're a Kansas fan, you're probably already looking ahead to next season because, oh, by the way, Darren Peterson's coming to town and he should be a complete stud, like from day one of the best players in college basketball. But yeah, 2 years in a row where things have been down and not only just down based off, performance, but the expectations coming into both seasons where they were preseason number one in college basketball. I think if this happened at North Carolina, if this happened at Kentucky, if this happened at any other school, I think a lot of fans would be hitting the alarm button. And Bill Self obviously gets a long leash. He's one of the best coaches in college basketball, but the way that both this season and last season have kind of spiraled for Self and for Kansas, I think it's certainly concerning. And going on the road last night, losing by 34 points and the way in which they lost. Yeah, it's just another red flag for the Jayhawks kind of as they near March.
Well, that's the other thing. We would have probably opened on this had Kansas lost by a point.
Yeah.
Or 5. They lost by 34. I mean, the visuals were bad. I mean, the team quit. I mean, I was doing the highlight all night. I mean, there's just wide open corner threes. Nobody's even close to a BYU shooter. There's Bill Self sitting on the bench, like just sitting there. I looking like the most frustrated he's ever been as a basketball coach. So that's the other thing. And afterward, Bill obviously said, if you saw the press conference, the best thing for us right now is we need to get away from each other because we're not, we need to get away from each other. And I think, that's not an abnormal thing for a basketball program or any type of, sports team. At some point you go through rough stuff and you need to get away from each other, but it's just not anything we've ever heard from him. Really. It's not anything we've ever seen from this program. And just to fan it out a little bit, how concerning would that be? Not just that they lost again and they have 7 league losses now and that they're 18-17 in their past 35 games against Big 12 opponents, but that, I mean, I don't know if you can prove this, but it certainly looked this way. They looked like they quit. Like they just didn't want to play anymore. Like they got down 10 and it went to 20 and it went to 30 and they just did not, there was no fight there whatsoever. What did you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of been a theme throughout the season, right? Like if you've watched this Kansas team, they've had some really impressive outings. As Self kind of said earlier this week, like they have some moments where things look like they're right. Most of the time they come, not surprisingly inside Allen Fieldhouse, but the inconsistency of this team throughout the year has just been jarring for a self-coached team. And the way in which they played last night, where effectively it looked like they just kind of put their hands up and it's like, all right, BYU, you can do whatever you want to do because we're not really totally invested in this. I don't think you want to extrapolate and say like, oh well, this team hates each other. But I think it is one of those situations where they're just kind of fed up. Like they're at a point in an inflection point in this season where they got to figure out exactly what they want to be. And that was kind of Self's challenge after the game is like, if you are going to make a decision about, whether you're going to defend the high pick and roll or whether you're going to kind of buck up and fight through and persevere through these hard times, like you got to commit to it. And the only thing this Kansas team right now seems to be committed to is just like completely floundering, completely just going about this season like, hey, whatever. They've got some, reflection to do over the next couple of days to figure out how they want to finish the season. The talent is still very, very high. Like this team is playing well below, I think, its talent level. And I think that's even more shocking. You know, it's not a Kansas team that doesn't have the talent. And so the fact that you're throwing out a stinker like that, losing on the road by 34 points and just completely quitting, it's frustrating, I'm sure, if yourself and as a fan watching it, it's a tough scene. It's tough to watch.
So the good news for Kansas is that the next two are manageable. Mm-hmm. It's Oklahoma State and Colorado. Those are two of the bottom three teams in the Big 12 standings. So this is a good play. If you're going to get right, this is the place to do it. Mm-hmm. You get humiliated on some level on a Tuesday night. You get back to Lawrence. You don't play again until this weekend, and your next two games are against teams that, frankly, you don't have to play well to beat. You should just be able to win these games. And so if you're going to try to flip this little bad stretch into a good stretch, you've got the type of opponents that will allow you, theoretically at least, to figure things out. But they need to figure things out. Like, this is not the Kansas program that has existed nearly at any point in my life. And like I said yesterday when we took the Ion College Basketball Podcast, CBS Sports Network, I am not willing to give up on a Bill Self team or a Bill Self coached program. I've seen him be excellent for too long, but it is undeniable. Again, let's just speak factually. This guy's been coaching power conference basketball for a quarter century. He is one of the best, not just working today, but of all time. Mm-hmm. He is one of the best of all time. That's true. This is also true. Last year was bad, and this year is arguably worse. And they've got to figure that out. Again, the next two winnable games, we'll look up in 2 weeks, because after that, it's a game against Texas Tech inside, I believe, Allen Fieldhouse. So we'll look up in a few weeks and see where they're at. But I never, as somebody who not only watched them move to number one in the preseason AP poll, but put them number one in the top 25 and one very early last offseason, I never expected on February 19th to be having this conversation about them.